They say the ancient world was built on faith, faith in the gods, in destiny, in the unseen hands that shaped men's fates. But what if, hidden among temples and sacrifices, there lived a man who dared to whisper the unthinkable? The gods are illusions. Man created them, not the other way around. Long before science, before modern atheism, before the Enlightenment's rebellion against heaven, there was a single mind in ancient Greece that saw through the veil. His name was Diagoras of Melos, and history would remember him by one title only: the world's first atheist. Yet what's most mysterious is not that he denied the gods. It's how he predicted the collapse of belief centuries before it began. Picture the scene: a crowded Athenian marketplace, filled with statues of Zeus, Athena, and Apollo, glittering with offerings. The air smells of incense and sacrifice. And through this holy spectacle walks a man, head uncovered, sandals dusty, eyes filled not with reverence, but with defiance. He pauses before the towering statue of Zeus. A priest chants prayers beside him. Diagoras smiles and murmurs loud enough for all to hear. If the gods truly cared, this statue would not need guarding. The crowd freezes. The priest glares. For in Athens, doubt was treason. That moment marked the birth of something dangerous, an idea so powerful it would echo through millennia, that the universe might not need divine order, that morality could exist without Olympus, and that truth could live in the mind alone. But Diagoras hadn't always been a heretic. Once, he was a poet, a man who sang praises to the very gods he would later denounce. He studied under the wise and the devout, writing hymns that celebrated faith and harmony. And yet, one day, everything changed. Some say it happened after the Battle of Melos, when his homeland was crushed under Athenian conquest and his people slaughtered. Others claim it was during a sacred ritual, when he witnessed priests manipulating miracles for gold. Whatever the cause, Diagoras' faith cracked like marble under truth's hammer. He began to ask questions, questions that no one dared speak aloud. Why do the gods allow the wicked to prosper? Why does justice fail when temples overflow with offerings? Why does thunder strike the poor man's home, not the tyrant's palace? The philosophers of Athens tried to silence him. The priests cursed his name. Yet Diagoras' words spread like wildfire. He told his followers that religion was born from fear, that men invented gods to explain storms, stars, and death, and that when knowledge grows, the gods shrink. Once, he said, we worshiped fire because we did not understand lightning. But the more we know, the less we bow. It was an idea 1,000 years too early, and for that, Athens would make him pay. Because the city that once welcomed philosophers would soon turn on the one who saw too far ahead, the man who dared to say that heaven was empty. The streets of Athens had seen many trials, philosophers accused of corruption, generals accused of treason, poets accused of blasphemy. But when Diagoras of Melos stood before the assembly, the air carried a different kind of tension. This wasn't merely about crime. It was about truth itself. Rumors had spread like wildfire. Diagoras had mocked the mysteries of Eleusis, the most sacred rites in all of Greece. He had laughed at initiates who claimed to see the secrets of life and death. He had even, according to whispered reports, torn apart a wooden statue of Heracles to boil his dinner. To the Athenians, that was not philosophy. It was sacrilege. When Diagoras entered the courtroom, he carried no fear. His robes were plain, his expression calm, even amused. The priests shouted accusations. The citizens demanded punishment. One man stood and declared, "This man denies the gods. He denies what makes Athens great." Diagoras raised his eyes and replied softly, "If the gods exist, let them defend themselves." Gasps filled the chamber. To speak such words was to risk instant execution. Yet Diagoras continued, his voice like iron cutting through marble. "You say the gods protect justice. Then where were they," he asked, "when my island was destroyed? When your soldiers burned Melos to the ground and slaughtered her sons? Did Zeus hold his thunderbolt then?" The assembly fell silent. Even his accusers hesitated. To the Athenian elite, Diagoras represented more than rebellion. He was the reflection they feared most, a man who saw reason where others saw reverence. His words tore through the myths that kept society intact. But power rarely tolerates truth. The priests called him atheos, godless, a term of pure venom, the same word that would one day define an entire movement of thought. A decree was issued. Diagoras of Melos is to be executed. Whoever captures him shall receive a reward in gold. That night, friends smuggled him out of the city. Under moonlight, he escaped Athens by boat, vanishing into the sea. Yet even in exile, his words survived. Sailors, merchants, and wandering thinkers carried his ideas to Rhodes, Sparta, and even Egypt. Some whispered them in secret meetings. Others etched fragments of his sayings onto clay tablets. He had no temple, no followers, no scrolls. And yet, his heresy began to spread like the seeds of a coming storm. One story says that when a sailor thanked the gods for surviving a shipwreck, Diagoras laughed. The sailor asked why. Diagoras pointed to the coastline, where wrecked ships littered the rocks. "You see those," he said. "There are no plaques for the men the gods did not save." It was sarcasm at its deadliest, the ancient birth of skepticism, long before the word atheism even existed. But Athens was not finished with him. The city could not allow a man to challenge the foundations of divine order. They sent spies and envoys, spreading word that Diagoras must be silenced. He would live the rest of his life hunted, exiled, condemned by the same civilization that claimed to worship wisdom. Yet the irony was undeniable. In trying to erase him, Athens would ensure his immortality. Because Diagoras' exile marked the birth of a question that would haunt the world for centuries. Can truth exist without the gods? Exile did not silence Diagoras of Melos. It refined him, like iron in the flame. Persecution stripped him of every illusion until only his conviction remained, that man's greatest prison was not ignorance, but belief. He traveled from island to island, Rhodes, Lesbos, Sparta, living as an outcast, but thinking as a free man. The Greeks called him the godless one, a name meant to shame him, but Diagoras wore it like a crown. "They call me godless," he said, "but perhaps it is the gods who are manless." To Diagoras, it was all a grand illusion, a theater of faith. Man-made gods, he said, in his own image, foolish, fearful, and fond of flattery. And slowly, people began to listen. In Rhodes, a small circle of young thinkers gathered around him in secret. They recorded fragments of his thoughts, though most would be lost to time. What survived through whispers and paraphrase would become the seeds of modern rationalism. The heavens are not ruled by divine minds, but by natural order. Morality needs no God, only understanding. Worship is the fear of the ignorant disguised as piety. These words spread quietly through the Aegean. Sailors carried them to port cities. Poets hid them in verses. Even some philosophers in Athens debated them behind closed doors. But every great idea comes with danger. In the Greek world, piety was not a choice. It was the glue of civilization. The festivals, the sacrifices, the oracles, they were more than religion. They were the heartbeat of the polis. To question them was to question Athens itself. So the name of Diagoras became taboo. No statue, no shrine, no mention in polite company. He became a ghost of thought, unacknowledged, unburied, but alive in rumor and fear. Still, his defiance inspired a new generation. Some say the young Epicurus, decades later, studied the old fragments of Diagoras' thought and built upon them a philosophy of reason without gods. Others suggest the Atomists, Leucippus and Democritus, found courage in his rebellion to claim that all things, even the soul, were made of matter. Whether true or not, one fact remains. Diagoras had lit a spark that refused to die. One story tells that during a storm at sea, the sailors panicked and began to pray to Poseidon. Diagoras stood calm while lightning cracked across the waves. When they asked if he wasn't afraid, he said, "Why should I fear the wind? It listens no more to prayer than to silence." They called him cursed. Yet the ship survived, and in that eerie calm, some began to wonder, what if he was right? What if the gods were not angry, because there were no gods at all? It was a thought too dangerous for his time, and too clear to be forgotten. For Diagoras' rebellion was not born of hatred for the divine, but love for truth, a truth that could survive without temples, priests, or fear. But his final years would test even that conviction. Alone, hunted, and aging, Diagoras would face the one question his philosophy could not answer. If the gods are illusions, what gives life its meaning when faith is gone? Next ChatGPT said, Part 4. The last question of Diagoras. The final years of Diagoras of Melos drifted through silence, not of peace, but of exile. He wandered across the Aegean like a shadow of forbidden thought, shunned by priests, ignored by kings, and feared even by those who secretly agreed with him. His name had become a curse whispered under the breath, the atheist of Melos. But even the gods he denied seemed to follow him. In Corinth, an earthquake struck the city the very night he arrived. "The wrath of the heavens," cried the people, demanding his execution. Diagoras only smirked and said, "If the gods destroy cities over the truth, perhaps they're not worth worshipping." He fled again, this time to Thasos, an island known for its poets and philosophers. There, an aging scholar named Philostratus took him in, curious to understand the man Athens had condemned. Over many nights, the two debated by the sea. Philostratus asked, "If you destroy faith, what remains for men to live by?" Diagoras replied, "Reason, compassion, justice, not from fear of gods, but love of truth. What is divine in man is not above him, it is within." Philostratus was struck silent. He realized that beneath Diagoras' defiance was not hatred, but a fierce belief in humanity's potential, that man could live morally without divine reward, and think freely without divine punishment. Yet doubt crept into even Diagoras' own heart. He saw how men clung to gods like children to mothers, terrified of a world without meaning. He began to wonder, had he freed them, or doomed them to despair? One night, standing alone on the cliffs, he watched the stars ripple across the Aegean sky. For the first time, he whispered, "Perhaps, even if the gods are illusions, the beauty they inspire is real." Was this regret or revelation? No one knows. But the next morning, Diagoras was gone. Some say he died quietly by the shore. Others claim he was murdered by zealots. A few legends whisper that he sailed away, vanishing into the horizon, a man searching for a land where thought was free. What remained of him were fragments, quotes passed down in riddles, writings burned but remembered. A later philosopher, Cicero, would call him the first to uproot the gods from human hearts. Another, Plutarch, called him the madness of reason. But Diagoras was not mad. He had simply asked the question his world feared most. What if belief is a comfort, not a truth? Centuries later, his question would echo again. In the words of Lucretius, Spinoza, Voltaire, and every thinker who dared to look at heaven and see only nature. He had planted the idea that morality could exist without mythology, that life could have meaning even if the universe had none. And though his bones were lost to time, his doubt lived on, whispered in taverns, written in secret scrolls, and finally, spoken aloud by the modern world. But even then, one riddle remained unsolved. If gods are illusions, why does mankind still need them so desperately? For in the silence after faith, even Diagoras might have heard a question that reason alone could not answer. Centuries passed, and Diagoras of Melos faded into legend, a name half remembered, half condemned. But in quiet libraries and forbidden scrolls, his defiance lived on like a whisper that would not die. The world that once called him mad began to change, slowly, secretly, and irreversibly. In the great halls of Alexandria, scholars debated the heavens not as divine realms, but as patterns of motion. The Stoics still spoke of destiny, the Epicureans of atoms. Yet beneath both philosophies pulsed the hidden pulse of Diagoras' question, what if the universe is only itself? The idea spread like a slow fire across centuries. When Epicurus declared that the gods exist, but care nothing for man. It was Diagoras' shadow speaking through him. When Lucretius, in De Rerum Natura, wrote that lightning was not Zeus' anger but nature's law, it was Diagoras' laughter echoing through Rome. Even in the age of Christian emperors, when heresy meant death, his ghost lingered. The bishops condemned the Melian blasphemy, though few even remembered what Melos was. In secret, thinkers preserved fragments of his defiance, calling it the philosophy of light without gods. And so, in a paradox of history, the man who denied the divine became one of the invisible fathers of modern thought. When Galileo looked through his telescope and found no gods among the stars, when Voltaire mocked the priests for selling salvation, when Nietzsche whispered God is dead, they were all, knowingly or not, repeating the crime of Diagoras. But his legacy was not only rebellion. It was freedom. Freedom from fear of divine punishment. Freedom to see morality as born of empathy, not obedience. Freedom to wonder, without needing the approval of heaven. Yet even now, thousands of years later, his question remains unfinished. Humanity has built rockets and computers, mapped the genome, and decoded the atom, and still, billions kneel to gods unseen. Perhaps Diagoras underestimated something profound. That belief is not only a chain, it is also a shelter. That man does not worship because he knows, but because he feels. And perhaps, even in a godless world, that yearning for meaning is its own kind of divinity. So when we look back to that exiled philosopher wandering the shores of Thasos, we see not a destroyer, but a mirror. A man who forced humanity to face itself, stripped of myth, left with nothing but thought. And maybe that was his true prophecy, not that gods would die, but that man would finally dare to live without them. For in that silence, after prayer, after fear, after faith, the voice that remains is not divine. It is human, and it says, think.